Hey, Morningstar. Last week's Supreme Court decision ignited a lot of emotion throughout our land, and nowhere more, it seems, than with people of faith. You see, for years, our government's definition and policies squared with our biblical understanding of marriage, being between one man and one woman. However, the privileged position that we as Christians enjoyed began to erode back in the 1970s, and over the past couple decades, the court of public opinion has been moving feverishly to broaden the definition to include same-sex couples, a decision which became official policy last week when the highest court in our land voted 5-4 to affirm it. Now, I can't even begin to understand what all this is going to eventually mean for our faith, for our church, for our denomination, much less our nation. In fact, the very possibility of the expansion of the definition of marriage caught me off guard. Honestly, I was dealing more with how the conversation about homosexuality and how the greater LGBT community was going to affect our United Methodist denomination. This fall, I've planned a message series on sexuality, which I still plan to do, but last week's decision prompted me to go ahead and share some thoughts and answer some questions about how we will address this as a community of faith here at Morningstar. First of all, while the Supreme Court apparently has the power to redefine marriage for our nation, I believe God's original blessing of one man and one woman dating back to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden continues to be our source of authority. Marriage, I believe, is God's gift. It's His design, and it's God's prerogative, not ours, to define. And so we will continue to stand with 2,000 years of Christian teaching. In fact, the United Methodist official stance on homosexuality states that while all persons are born in the image of God and all persons have sacred worth, homosexuality is, I quote, incompatible with Christian teaching. Furthermore, United Methodist pastors, which I am, are not permitted to perform same-sex civil unions or marriages, whether it's inside or outside the church building. Now, this issue has been challenged by some in our denomination for many years, with several pastors across our nation acting in outright disobedience over the past few years. This is leading our denomination to what I believe is a collision course at what is called General Conference. General Conference is the official policy-making entity of the United Methodist Church. General Conference is made up of both elected ordained clergy and equal number of lay people. General Conference meets every 4 years and is scheduled to meet next year in Portland, Oregon. And if I had a crystal ball, my prediction is that there will be some sort of legislation adopted which allows for individual congregations to eventually choose sides, if you will. The truth is that persons who support same-sex marriage and sexuality are not going to turn back. They're going to continue to push for that acceptance. And on the other hand, the vast majority of ordained clergy and lay persons who comprise our United Methodist General Conference, as well as the superabundance of representation from other parts of the world, like Africa especially, where Christianity and United Methodism are growing and flourishing exponentially, they're adamant about retaining our traditional biblical understanding of marriage and sexuality. As your pastor, I will continue to lead us to do the following. First of all, to hold fast to biblical teaching, affirm the doctrine of marriage as between one man and one woman. Second of all, to equip us all on how to stand for and engage others in this conversation, to truly be able to speak this truth in love to our neighbors and friends, many of whose attitudes have now swayed or shifted in recent years. While we do not condone sex outside of marriage between one man and one woman, neither do we take a condemning posture. Furthermore, we won't single out the sin of homosexuality. Rather, we'll remind ourselves that all of us have and continue to sin and fall short of the glory of God, that we all, in fact, stand in need of God's forgiveness and mercy and grace. And to that end, I hope and plan, desire that Morningstar Church continues to be a place where all persons who struggle with any and every sin feel accepted and welcomed into this community of faith. Personally, my tent as a pastor, and I pray our tent as a church collectively will always be big enough to include people who I or we don't see eye to eye with. And finally, I endeavor to lead us to consider how we can make an even more concerted effort to lift up, respect, and honor the institution of covenant Christian marriage. To see our own marriages as a witness to the world, a witness to the union between Jesus and his church, and to take a stand against sex outside of or before marriage, to take a stand against infidelity and divorce just as strongly as we stand against same-sex marriage. Friends, the struggle we face is so much bigger than the Supreme Court's ruling last week. It's actually a struggle to remain steadfast to God's unchanging truth amidst a culture which, across the board, seeks to make most any and all truth relative. Where Christianity no longer enjoys a privileged status in terms of government policy, and where we're surrounded more and more these days by people who have different values and traditions than we do. That we would then assume the challenge to take God's word and our faith more seriously than we have in the past. And finally, to witness to the blessing that comes when we're obedient to God's plans and purposes for our lives. Friends, this will no doubt be a defining moment for Christianity in our nation. And I encourage all of us to realize the power we have and how we respond. To understand that, hey, on both sides of this issue, there are very well-meaning people who love Jesus, people who love his church. And so then we would commit to not cast stones or engage in name-calling in places like social media, but rather to assume the posture of Jesus, to stand up for our convictions, but to stand up with less condemnation and greater compassion. To pray for open hearts to all people, to pray for those who assume us to be their enemies, to pray even for those who will persecute us by calling us short-sighted or narrow-minded or closed-minded or behind the times or even bigots. Hey, let's commit to demonstrating to the world that they will know us as Christians, not for what we stand against, but what we stand for. Just like the early followers of Jesus, the world would know us because of the love we have for others. So in the midst of a Supreme Court ruling which redefined marriage, I'd propose that this is our time to reaffirm not only God's definition of marriage, but to exemplify Christ's attitude of love, his definition of love and what that really looks like. To love others as we love ourselves, that we would represent Christ to this broken and confused world. Friends, we're up to this. We're up to it not because of who we are, but because it's Jesus' church. It's his church, and he's the same yesterday, today, and forevermore. So Morning Star, represent him. Be the church this week, and I'll see you in worship this weekend. Thanks for listening, and God bless you.